Hey there, this is Taylor Elwood, your mad scientist and magical experimenter, and welcome to the live magical experiment show, which happens every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, today we're going to be talking about magic on the fly. In the Magical Experiments Facebook group, which incidentally, if you look in the description for this show, you can see a link to that, as well as the Pop Culture Magic group, and of course the Magical Experiments University. Feel free to check those out. In the Magical Experiments Facebook group, we ended up talking a little bit about magic on the fly. People wanted to learn about that. So first of all, what do we mean by magic on the fly? Well, what we really mean is that we're taking, or at least in my opinion, magic on the fly is practical magic minimalism. It's being able to do magic in the moment with whatever you have on hand, instead of necessarily having to bring, a whole bunch of tools. Now, when a lot of people think of magic, they may think of magic in terms of ceremonial magic, where you have to have the right ritual clothing, the right ritual tools, the right incense, candles, etc., etc. Yeah. I've done those kinds of rituals, believe it or not. When I started practicing magic when I was 16, I didn't go out and buy a sword or anything, but I was able to get a knife, and I did some stuff. But it's interesting because when I was 16, I had a very limited budget. It wasn't like I could go out and do some of the elaborate rituals in the books that I wanted to be able to do. I had to improvise. I had to find ways to take what I had with me and make use of that. So a lot of times I would read about a ritual and they would say, you need X, you need this tool, or you need that tool, or you need this or that, or whatever else. And they wouldn't have any, I didn't have anything like that on hand. So what I ended up doing is I had to improvise, because I didn't have a ton of money at the time. I was a 16-year-old kid and I wanted to do magic, and I didn't have all the ritual bling that everyone said you needed to have. Hello to the people who are watching. Feel free to comment with questions or comments as you're watching. So what I ended up doing is, at 16, I improvised. I did get I did get a hold of a knife. That I used for ritual work, but in a lot of other cases, like I found a stick in the wood, and I used that stick in the wood for the improvisation, for the practical magic minimalism that I was going for. And by learning to improvise early on, what it really taught me was that, a lot of magic is ultimately very optional. A lot of things that are portrayed. Later on, of course, I would go and I would do some of those rituals with all the required bling, and I didn't find that it made a significant amount of difference. It wasn't like all of a sudden, it's improved a whole bunch of times. And the reason for that, really, quite frankly, is because if we think about why we use magical tools and other things like that, what we're really doing is we're trying to create an experience. An experience where we alter our perspective of reality, and we access probabilities, and we turn them into something that we can use in our magical work. When you understand that about magic, it makes you look at those tools a little differently, because suddenly you're not looking at them and saying, well, I absolutely need to have this tool in order to do magic. Well, this tool is part of the experience that's helping me to create the magical work that I'm doing, but it's not absolutely essential. I can manage to do this without it. And that was kind of what happened for me. Not only that, but as I was this teenager, working on this stuff and trying to figure out how to do this, I started to also look at things that I had access to that didn't necessarily involve money. For example, I had access to my body. Now, that may sound a little weird when I put it that way, but seriously, your finger can be a potent magical tool. So can your saliva, your blood, your hair, your nails, etc., etc. And I think a lot of times people don't think about that, because they're like, oh, well, I have to do magic this way. I have to use these particular types of tools. I have to have this ceremonial bling, etc., etc. But I didn't have that. One of the first major rituals that I did, it was actually when I was 18. So it was a couple of years later. But one of the first major rituals I did involved giving blood to the fairies, my blood to the fairies. So I took a knife and I cut myself and I gave blood to the different types of elemental spirits and the fairies. And I did that as a way to pay homage to them, but also to exchange some of my life essence for some of their life essence. And that working really showed me that I could take something such as my body and make my body part of the magical working that I wanted to do. And it was a very illustrative lesson, because instead of continuing to rely upon something that was written out down in the books that said, you have to do magic this way, what I discovered was, well, no, you can adapt magic to as long as you understand what you're working with, you can adapt magic to what you need. Now, with that said, I'm going to tell you that one thing that can be very useful is actually creating a kit for your practical magic. If you have to do magic on the fly, it can be nice to bring a little kit with you. Now, at the same time, you can't necessarily bring your ritual garb, your staff and your sword and all that other stuff. I mean, it looks a little conspicuous. If you have to do magic out in a public place, the last thing you want is to be bringing stuff that's going to make people gawk and stare and possibly call the police. No fun. So one of the things I recommend doing is actually creating a kit of sorts, something that you can put in a bag, like a backpack or a purse or whatever else. And when you're thinking about what should go into that kit, I mean, think about items that you can use for magic that people won't take too much of a look at. Like, for example, chalk, right? We could take chalk and you could chalk something like on a wall or on the street, and most people probably aren't going to give it a second glance. They may not even look at it at a first glance. Or lipstick, or something along those lines. And here's the beautiful thing about that. We can take something like lipstick, which, granted, is usually used for lips, right? But why not put it to a magical use? Why not take that lovely shade of red and pop it down there and use it on your magical art that you're creating to do your working? You can take like a little thing like a rock or two, or some twigs or whatever if you want to, and make that part of your practical magic minimalism, with your kit. Pen and paper can also be excellent tools. So if you need to have a kit on hand, just think about what do I absolutely need to have in order to do magic, and what can I improvise with? What are tools that I can use that don't necessarily rely on me going to some new age or occult bookshop and buying a bunch of expensive tools that I can't take anywhere except for in my room. Make it into something where you can use it. Another thing that I used to do is I used to wear a lot of necklaces. I don't really anymore, but I would take those necklaces and turn them into objects that I could use for my magical working. So you can do that with jewelry, rings, necklaces, things like that, bracelets, watches. I used to take a lot of, back in the day when I wore a watch, I don't anymore, but back in the day when I did, I used to take that watch and turn it into a magical object. It was kind of my protection. It was kind of one of my protection shield, kind of like Harry Dresden with the protection shield thing. It's a good example of that. So you just want to keep that in mind and look at what you have and say, okay, what can I take here that I have access to that can even be an everyday item, and make that into something that I can use for my magical working. Some people also will do something where they'll take like a cloth sheet and they'll paint on it, or they'll use like invisible ink or something like that, or something washable, and you can take that and turn it into like a ceremonial circle that you bring with you. Another example that kind of comes to mind actually would be taking tarot cards with you. Now, tarot cards are a little obvious, but and in the book Portable Magic by Donald Tyson, he does talk about how you can actually use tarot cards for magical workings, and I recommend the book. He lays it out, so check it out. But that's another example where you could even take like a deck of regular playing cards. It doesn't have to be tarot cards, but you could take a deck of regular playing cards and create specific associations with each card, or put little sigils on them, or whatever you need to do in order to make that deck into something that you could use for magical workings. So that's kind of what I think of when you think about magic on the fly. It's just improvisational magic, magic that's done with what you have on hand. And of course, yes, you can bring what you have on hand with you. I mean, you can bring a kit with you, but the kit should be something that's not obvious to people. You don't want it to be screaming out, oh, hey, this person's got a knife or something like that. Because again, the last thing we want are people calling the cops. And I will note, you know, I mentioned in my original story when I did my improvisational that I did have a knife with me, you know, because I was doing blood workings, and I was actually going to different parts of where I was living and going and doing these workings. But I did it late at night. So time of day can be another thing to think about with your improv magic, because I did it late at night when, you know, people weren't going to necessarily be noticing what I was doing per se. So keep that in mind as well. The other thing I want to share with you is that you do already have the most potent magical tool. And that potent magical tool is your body. I already talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'm going to talk about it again. I can't emphasize it enough. Your body is one of the most potent magical tools you have access to. And a lot of people take it for granted. But really, you can do so many amazing things with your awesome body. You know, like I said, you can use a finger as a ritual working tool, you know. You can take, you know, your nail clippings, your hair, your blood, saliva, cum, whatever else, and use that as part of magical working. But you can also just take the movement of your body, you know, like how I'm doing this right here with my hand. You know, you can turn that into something that has magical meaning if you want to. So don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself to what, you know, you read in the books, which say you have to have X tool, X tool, X tool before you can do magic. You don't need all that stuff. It can be useful, and I do think it's worth it sometimes to use some of those classic tools for magical workings. I still do on occasion. But don't limit yourself to them. Don't let them box you in and cause you to only see certain things that, you know, people say you have to do things a certain way. You don't have to. You can experiment with your magical workings and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this show for today. We'll be back again next week, same bat time, same bat channel, so with a new topic. And check out the, if you're not a member of my Facebook groups, check those out. Or if you want to level up your magical practice, check out Magical Experiments University, which has a bunch of amazing courses that I offer and has a low monthly subscription fee. All right, talk later. And we'll be continuing this conversation in the Facebook groups, by the way. So look for that, and talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.